All right. It's 7:02. So I'll call to order today's meeting of the Mountain View Rental Housing Committee on August 12th, 2019. We'll start with a roll call. Committee members Susan Almond. Here. Nicole Haynes-Livesay. Vanessa Honey.
Present.
Julian Pardo-Dezella.
Present.
And Vice Chair Emily Ramos.
Here.
Since committee member Haynes-Livesay won't be in attendance today, well, she is our alternate committee member, so we're okay. First item of business is 3.1, approval of minutes for the June 24th meeting. Copies of the minutes for the above noted meeting have been delivered to committee members and copies are available at City Hall. Are there any questions from committee members on the minutes? Seeing none, would any members of the public like to comment on the minutes for June 24th? All right. If there are no corrections or additions, a motion is in order to approve these minutes. Would anyone?
I'd like to move to approve the minutes.
All right, we have a second. All in favor? Aye. Passed unanimously. All right, we'll move on to oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for 1 3-minute period during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. I think I would say we do have another agenda item that is broad-ranging. So if you would like to comment on a specific topic, I'd say let's try to use the time for that agenda item to do that, unless you have topics that weren't listed in the staff report at all. Would anyone like to address the committee at this time on non-agenda items? All right. Thank you. So then we'll move on to item 7.1, which is the Rental Housing Committee input for potential city-initiated 2020 ballot measure to amend the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act. I believe we have a presentation from Anki. Yes, all right.
So good evening, Rental Housing Committee. My name is Tim Wong, and I am the Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager. And good to see you all again, and thank you for having me. This evening, the purpose of this item is to receive input from the RHC regarding potential amendments to the CSFRA as requested by the CSFRA subcommittee. And just as a quick summary, as you all know, the CSFRA became effective in December of 2016, and following in November of 2018, the City Council accepted the 2020 initiative, which official title is the Mountain View Homeowner, Renter, and Taxpayer Protection Initiative. And in regards to that initiative, it is up to the City Council to choose whether they wish to place it on the March 2020 or November 2020 ballot. But prior to that, the City Council wished to explore potential CSFRA amendments. So in June, it created the CSFRA subcommittee, specifically tasked to look at potential amendments. And as part of it, the RHC submitted a letter in June following, as part of that meeting, expressing their interest in participating in the process. And on July 23rd, 2019, the subcommittee had its first meeting. But before we begin talking about input from the RHC, I would like to pass this over to Anki, where she will talk about summarizing the 2020 initiative and its potential amendments. Okay, thank you, Anki. Just to go through the quick CSFRA subcommittee timeline. So August 19th is the scheduled second meeting for the subcommittee, and as part of that, that is where they would really like to hear from stakeholders and the RHC about potential amendments. And following the August meeting, there's a September 12th meeting that has been scheduled, but it looks like that will be moved up a week. So to be able to make the September 17th City Council meeting. At the September 17th council meeting, that's where the CSFRA subcommittee will start making some potential recommendations about amendments. And then following up in October and November, the subcommittee will continue to deliberate with final recommendations going to the city council in November in order to make the March 2020 ballot, because any final decision has to be, the county has to receive the ballot by December 6th. So that is the timeline as we are working on it as we speak. So thank you.
So just as a background information, because we haven't talked about this in a rental housing committee meeting, is to give a summary of the 2020 initiative that was put on the ballot by voter initiative. There's 8 major key components of this initiative, and I will quickly go through each one of them. The first one is called an income eligibility requirements. The CSFRA currently does not have such an eligibility requirement, but covers all households living in rent-controlled rental units. And the initiative introduces a means testing program and would limit application of rent stabilization to those households whose annual income does not exceed 100% of the AMI. These rental households also need to apply annually to be eligible for rent-stabilized increases and carry the burden of proof for their income eligibility. Which makes me want to skip this one. I just talked about it. Here's an overview of the income per household size. The second key component is the suspension rule that is based on a 3% vacancy rate. Under the current CSFRA, the Rental Housing Committee may decide to suspend the CSFRA if the average annual vacancy rate of covered rental units exceeds 5%. And this initiative proposes that it requires suspension if the average annual vacancy rate for all rental units equals or exceeds 3% for 6 consecutive months. And the Rental Housing Committee is required to review the vacancy rates on a quarterly basis. This shows a table comparing all rental units versus rental units built before 1995, and where the initiative decontrol would happen versus where the CSFRA is putting their suspension percentage at 5%. Upon suspension, the 2020 initiative proposes to have a rental housing dispute resolution program in place. This is a program that was in place in 2016, right before Measure V was voted in, and it provides for conciliation and mediation services for rent increases over 7%, but also disputes over service reductions, security deposits, termination notices, maintenance repairs, and break leases. And it also provides for mandatory but non-binding arbitration for increases over 7% and service reductions. Another major component in this 2020 initiative is that it allows for all capital improvements to be considered in a petition process. Currently, these capital improvements need to be based on certain code enforcement, code compliance, or prevention of code violations. The 2020 initiative also modifies the tenant relocation eligibility AMI from 120% back to 100% AMI. Probably most of you remember that the tenant relocation assistance ordinance did provide for 100% AMI before Measure V came into effect. And in the table, you can see a comparison of the actual income brackets for that. The 2020 initiative also provides for a slight modification of the just cause provisions. It eliminates a notice to cease for a just cause based on criminal activity. Currently under the CSFRA, for 4 just cause reasons, landlords have to give a notice to cease in order for the tenant to be able to make modifications or correct a violation. The 2020 initiative also puts a restriction on the use of city funds. It expressly prohibits use of city funds unless 4 or more city council members approve, and it expressly prohibits members from the Rental Housing Committee to receive compensation or benefits. At the startup of the program, the Rental Housing Committee did use city funds, but those were refunded back to the city in its full fiscal year. And the currently members of the Rental Housing Committee do not receive any compensation nor benefits. The 2020 initiative also stipulates that the maximum rental housing fee is set at a maximum of $100 in 2019, with yearly allowed increases limited to CPIU percentage. Compare that to where the CSFRA currently has their annual rental housing fees set. For this fiscal year, it is $101 per rental unit. And that concludes that background information about the 2020 initiative. So I'm going to hand it back over to Tim for the subcommittee.
Okay, thank you, Anki. Tag team approach going here. So to get back to the July 23rd subcommittee meeting, there were a number of items discussed by the subcommittee in terms of potential amendments, but there were some common themes that all members brought up as part of the meeting. And here are 3 of them with a other category, and I'll explain the other category in a bit. But what the common themes were, they wanted to look at the relationship between the RHC and the city. They were interested in exploring rent stabilization for mobile home parks, which also is in fact a council goal for this next couple of years. They were interested in exploring potentially a streamlined petition process. And then there's this other category, which mostly, though all the members didn't necessarily say specifically, they wanted the CSFRA to be a workable, sustainable, easy to use or program. So that's fairly high level, but if the RHC has any comments or input regarding that, it would be greatly appreciated. So that really are 4 items that staff is looking at to get input from the RHC. Again, the relationship, does the RHC have any input or other issues to clarify with respect to the relationship between the CSFRA and the City Council? More specifically. And then secondly, mobile home parks. Does the RHC have any additional input to address rent stabilization for mobile homes? Number 3, does the RHC have any specific input regarding the streamlined petition process? And once again, lastly, does the RHC have any additional input about potential amendments? This is kind of like the catch-all for the RHC to provide any type of input about potential amendments to the CSFRA. And in addition to these 4 questions, there are some additional questions that staff would like input from the RHC.
So the following are a couple of issues that staff has noticed over the couple of years and that we would like to have further clarification on. One of them is there is a lack of clarification regarding exemptions for rentals shorter than 30 days, retirement residences, and corporate housing. Then we wrestled quite a bit in the beginning of the CSFRA that what is a single-family home and what is a duplex? What are the definitions given by the CSFRA? These definitions resulted in certain situations where a single-family home with another structure on the same parcel all of a sudden is no longer exempt. And it also gave some examples where multiple duplexes on one property were exempt. So we would like to clarify what the intent or the recommendation of the Rental Housing Committee is in that regard. Then we also would like to ask your consideration for some monitoring and compliance. As you all know, we've been working hard to get a database in place, and currently we're working on phase 3 to implement the whole petition process into the database. It would be nice if landlords were actually register their properties so we have real data from our rental community to inform the Rental Housing Committee on a month-to-month basis.
So that concludes staff's presentation, ending with what input would the RHC wish to provide to the council subcommittee regarding potential amendments to the CSFRA with consideration to those questions posed by staff. So again, that concludes staff's presentation. Happy to answer any questions the RHC may have.
Thank you, Tim and Anki. So for the committee, staff and I worked on a plan to work through. It's a broad-ranging, meaty agenda item we have, but that is how we're going to spend the bulk of today's meeting. So we prepared some rules of the road, how we think this could go, but feel free to provide feedback. So, this is an informal study session on proposed potential amendments. RHC members are encouraged to share their opinions about the topics, and staff will be taking down all comments from the RHC on potential amendments and reporting those to the council subcommittee. Staff has also identified some topics, and I imagine all of us will also propose topics for discussion. In addition to individual comments, we may take straw votes of the RHC to provide these council subcommittee with some sense of the strength of the RHC's position regarding certain amendments. Individual comments and any straw votes will be reported to the council subcommittee to provide a general sense of the RHC's position, but not as a formal recommendation one way or the other. Again, members' individual comments regarding the amendments will also be reported. So to organize the discussion, I propose we first discuss the topics identified by the subcommittee, those 3 topics. Allow each RHC member to speak on the issue if they choose, and then turn to any other issues that the RHC members would like to discuss. And then as a last item, we can discuss the issues identified by staff if we have time, or if that could also be included in the other topics that each of us brings up. I'd also say that maybe for this part, any specific questions to Anki or Tim, go through those specific questions, not necessarily about issues, but just about the content or the rules of the road or how we'll go through this. And then we do public comment, and then we'd come back and have our discussion. So I guess the first question is, how does that sound to everyone? All right. So does anyone have any questions just about the kind of the process, how we're going to go through these topics or about the presentation that Tim or Anki gave?
I just have one little question. Is the plan to have a competing ballot measure in 2020 from the city? Would that be in, we don't know, March or November? Would the ballot measure come out the same time as the competing ballot measure?
Thank you for that question. In terms of the process, I am not sure what the plans are in terms of competing ballot measures or not. But this process is to explore potential amendments. And at this point, I don't think anything has been decided about when the ballots would go, whether they're simultaneous. I would think so because of some financial considerations, but that has not been fully vetted at this point.
But Tim, it's safe to say that one of the options would be to put the subcommittee and then council could put them on a ballot measure, and that could also be, be on the ballot at the same time as the other measure, right?
Yes, that is a possibility. Yeah.
And then some individual issues on here could be just city council could make their own plan or their own regulation for some of those, as long as it didn't interfere with the CSFRA. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Sure, Emily.
A question about the 2020 initiative. Is it the choice of the city council or the initiative backers on when it goes on the ballot?
As far as I understand, it is the choice of the city council when it's put on either March or November.
Any other questions about process or just understanding of the content that was in the presentation? Sure, Emily.
All right, and in terms of overview, we have the questions to Tim and other staff, then we do public comment, and then we do each one of these 4 questions, including the other bucket.
That's right, or that was the plan, but
Okay.
we can make edits. And I think of there's 4 topics of the subcommittee, but one of them is really the catch-all topic. So we've got 3 topics, and then I think we would ask the rest of the RHC if there are any, which topics do you feel passionate about that you would like to discuss? And then I think we would move to any of the staff items that are not included in our list. Then we would try to get feedback on those.
So I have a question. I don't want to move the bucket, but wouldn't we want to hear public comment first so we'd understand what the public is?
Sorry, yes. So next thing we would do is public comment, and then we would have everything that we just talked about. Yeah, sorry if that was unclear. All right. So for public comments, how many people would like to speak? Just raise your hand. Okay. All right. That seems reasonable. So I think we can keep it at the 3 minutes. If more people file in, we'll go to 2 minutes. But otherwise, you have your full 3 minutes. And if you could please fill out a card as well. And also, Kurt, you're going to say your name, but if everybody could also announce your name as you come up, that'd be great.
Kurt Conroy, Mountain View Housing Provider. Committee members, thank you for your service to the community and the opportunity to address you tonight. The item in front of us now addresses the RHC's input to the City Council for a possible ballot measure to amend the CSFRA. Ex-Mayor Siegel has called the Measure V too costly ballot measure a sneak repeal. The fact of the matter is that the entire CSFRA should be repealed. Rent control in all its forms, be it rent caps, just cause eviction limitations, tenant relocation assistance, short-term rental regulations, etc., all have the same effect: to drive units off the market and to discourage the development of new housing. Proponents of these policies have little appreciation of what an affront to investors' sense of free markets and fair play they represent. If they did, they would realize that all of these regulations are just further nails in the coffin of the area's housing shortage and bode higher rents. The reality is that there are only two groups of people that consistently benefit from such misguided legislation: attorneys who know that such regulations create conflict, which generates their fees, and bureaucrats whose livelihoods are dependent upon enforcing these laws. Cambridge, Massachusetts imposed rent control in 1970. In 1995, the state of Massachusetts passed a referendum banning rent control statewide. It took Massachusetts 25 years to figure it out. I'm hoping that Mountain View doesn't take so long. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, please.
Okay, I just wanted to address the definition.
Sorry, could you state your name? Thank you.
Tom McNeil. I just wanted to address the definition of a duplex. I live on a property that has 5 rental units. My unit happens to have a contiguous roof with a unit next door, so it qualifies as a duplex. And I am now exempt from any sort of rent control. I had 3 increases last year, just received my second one for this year. So I'm priced out of my home. And I understand there can be some refinement in the definition of a duplex in a situation like this. And I'm hoping you'll address that a bit, give it a little more attention. That's basically it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Gail Nyhan, and I've been a homeowner here in Mountain View for over 40 years. I fully support the CSFRA in its purpose to stabilize rents for thousands of families at all income levels in our community. I think you, the Rental Housing Committee, and the supporting staff should be proud of the work you've done in the last 2 years, and I urge you to resist efforts by the City Council to make any major or unnecessary changes to the Charter Amendment known as Measure V. I think the RHC needs to remain an independent body connected to the City Council only by their power of appointment of its members. This seems vital to prevent rent stabilization and just cause termination from becoming political footballs, subject to the ups and downs of electoral politics. Measure W, which gave more control to the City Council, was rejected by the voters. Costs of the CSFRA are covered by landlord fees per unit, which have been low and decreasing over time. An efficient petition process has been established, which could be streamlined if the City Council decides to require seismic retrofit of soft-story buildings. Thank you very much for all your time and effort.
Thank you.
Hello, RHC Board. My name is Alex Nunez, Mountain View resident and beneficiary of this law. I think, from the perspective of, the question, who is this law intended to benefit, which would be tenants and rent control? Honestly, this discussion, to me, I just ask why. Why are we even, it just feels like, what do they call it, a solution in search of a problem to me at this point. There's a lot of troubling parts, in what's been recommended that essentially shift some of the burden onto residents and tenants who this is intended to help. Income eligibility requirements, going through a whole lengthy application process. Some people may not have, all the documentation that people like citizens might have. If you're your own employee or your own boss, then corralling all that documentation can definitely be a huge burden. Right now, it's very easy. There's not a bureaucracy to have to search through all of these documentations, and so the mean testing is just going to cause more headaches for you fine folk and for residents who are benefiting today. Other parts of this, including The suspension, I think the public at this point is pretty well aware that the 3% is a poison pill intended to kill rent control. The capital improvements, if there's already a petition process for that, and if the landlord or housing provider, as others might say, actually prove that they have made the building safer, nicer, whatever that may be, then there's a process for that. We don't need to over-legislate here. And honestly, I think the worst part of this is this whole idea about modifying the just cause to, like criminal activity. My understanding of that right now is that you don't even need to be convicted of a crime. It can just be as minor as a police report getting submitted. And so maybe one day you got into an argument with a friend, or maybe something happened and now there's a police report and you're out of your apartment because supposedly there was a crime. So I think just like the previous speaker noted, I would definitely urge this body to just like ask why. This is not going to benefit tenants. This is really, I think, just a grab or an opportunity being sought to weaken the protections in favor of landlords. And also, I would go so far as to maybe if we wanted to really improve it, maybe RHC members should be voted in and not appointed by the city council, make it a really truly independent body. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sue Russell. I'm speaking on behalf of the Los Altos Mountain View League of Women Voters. We did a comprehensive study of CSFRA after it was passed by the voters, including a study of rent stabilization programs throughout California. The study resulted in our support of the basic tenets of CSFRA, including both the rent stabilization and the just cause components. We would be very opposed to any modification that would undermine the basic intent of CSFRA, which we concluded benefits the entire community by providing more stable housing. The council has recently prioritized prevention of displacement. CSFRA is clearly one of the most important tools for stopping displacement, as it protects hardworking families from having high rent increases and from arbitrary evictions. The council CSFRA subcommittee seemed to agree that changing the vacancy rate from 5% to 3%, as included by the proposed 2020 initiative, would gut CSFRA. As the staff report points out, 5% is a generally accepted standard percentage indicating an affordable housing emergency. We also believe that changing the AGA from CPI to a flat percentage such as 5% suggested by one of the council members on the subcommittee would violate the intent of CSFRA. The CPI is commonly used and due to vacancy decontrol allows landlords a fair rate of return. The difference between 3% and 5%, for example, for an apartment renting for $2,500 per month, which is probably at the low end at this point, would be $75 per month at a 3% increase, and $125 per month at a 5% increase. For an apartment renting for $3,000 per month, the difference would be more dramatic, a $90 increase versus a $150 monthly increase. Allowing higher increases would create hardships for many of the hardworking families currently protected by CSFRA, forcing them to leave their apartments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Edie Keating. My overall thoughts is that the CSFRA is working and that this body, the Rental Housing Committee, has done a good job over the 2 years you've been in existence to implement the CSFRA. Regarding the 2020 initiative, as your staff report calls it, otherwise known as the sneaky repeal, there's only one possible policy in there that I might hold up to you. I hope you don't mind, but if you wanted to codify that you all should not be paid, I would not mind that. It would lighten up some of the letters to the editor and take away one advertisement falsity from some of the ads we're likely to see in the future. Other than that, I don't see anything that I would advise you to consider in the landlord initiative. So there are many other sources of input that have the community thinking about what you might be considering, and retrofits is certainly one of those. And so that shows up as reimbursement for a capital improvement. So if you do nothing, then the current petition process allows reimbursement to the landlords or even for their loan expenses. It's one of the few exceptions where the interest expense could be part of the petition process if it's for health and safety. So that doesn't sound so horrible. I don't know as it's needed. And one of the good things that this committee has done on many different topics is hear what other jurisdictions have done. And so at your next meeting, maybe this input to the council wouldn't come quite as quick as you would like, but I hope you look at what other jurisdictions have done about seismic retrofits. Some don't call them rent increases at all. They call them pass-throughs or surcharges because that keeps it separate from the ongoing rent increase that accumulates. The other thing about the pass-throughs that other communities have implemented, one is that they have a limit on the per month increase, and one has a 10-year limit on how long you could be receiving this additional surcharge to pay for the retrofits, and then it's done with. What I could not support, what I don't think the community would support and will be fought very heavily, is if you expand the ability to have a streamlined process to pass through any capital improvement. Tenants did not want to have their rent raised because their landlord decided on marble counters and hardwood floors. That violates the intent of the CSFRA. That would cause much displacement and rent increases, and it would be strongly opposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shannon Thompson, and I'm speaking as a tenant of a duplex in Mountain View, and specifically on the issue of the definition of duplexes. I voted in favor of CSFRA and received notices stating that it would help stabilize my rent, which is great in an increasingly expensive community to live. My complex consists of a total of 9 units on a single parcel, 4 of which are duplexes and 1 is a single unit, and none of which in which the landlord lives. I was surprised to discover that, as the CSFRA is currently written, our units are exempt from CSFRA due to being duplexes, while the single unit is not exempt simply because it is not physically adjoined to one of the other units. The CSFRA clearly did not intend to exempt the thousands of renters who live in units similar to ours, large for-profit complexes consisting of multiple duplexes on a single parcel, with shared fences and driveways. The section of the CSFRA that excludes duplexes, Section 1704, is written with the intent of protecting homeowners who have an interest in living in some portion of the rental property. This is made clear first by the title of the section, Homeowner Protections, secondly by the first line stating that homeownership is of great importance to the citizens of Mountain View, and thirdly by the 2 other types of exempted units in that section, which are single-family homes and condos where the tenant is living in the main home and renting out, say, a room to a tenant, and companion units, colloquially called mother-in-law units, where the landlord lives in the adjacent family home structure and rents out the companion unit. The clear goal of this section is to protect homeowners with renters on part of their property, but no such need exists in the case of for-profit complexes like mine, which are exempt under the current law merely because they happen to have exactly 2 units per building rather than 1 or 3 or greater than 3 or any other number than 2. The way the CSFRA is currently written causes significant confusion and a large impact on tenants in these types of complexes. For example, my landlord was not required to roll back the rent to October of 2016 as mandated by the CSFRA and has increased the rent annually since then. Many tenants, I believe, are hesitant to bring up the issue as they fear retaliation by landlords. I ask that you please think of my situation and the situation of many other tenants in exactly these types of complexes when you are considering amendment to the CSFRA and provide clarity for landlords and tenants alike. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Marie Chelberg, and I am a renter living in Mountain View. And as both staff and previous members of the public have mentioned, the duplex issue is one that I would ask the Rental Housing Committee to consider, and I'd like to share my own personal story as to why. So I received the CSFRA newsletter telling me that I was covered by rent control. So I was surprised when that very same day I received a rent increase notice from my landlord that was higher than what was allowed by rent control. I called him thinking there must be some mistake, and he told me, no, you live in a duplex, so you're not covered. And I thought that can't possibly be right. In this one parcel of land, there are 4 duplexes and a single family home. That's a total of 9 units that are all sharing this private property that are all rented out by the same landlord. So I went to the drop-in office hours held for CSFRA and was told by the staff there that indeed, because I happen to live in a duplex, I wasn't covered. Despite the fact that, again, these 9 units, you can even tell by the addresses, 1902, 1902 A, B, C, all the way through H. These are clearly one set of units, and yet I'm not covered, and neither are anyone else in the other 8 units that are in duplexes. However, my neighbor to the left, who is in the single-family home, is covered by CSFRA. Surely, if the duplex exemption was meant to help homeowners, it couldn't possibly apply to all 8 of the units that are in these duplexes. My landlord can't live in all 8 of those at once. And honestly, I'm scared of getting priced out of my home. I've lived there for 3 years. I would like to live there for many more years. And if my landlord can continue to increase the rent by far more than rent control, which other members of the public have stated has already happened to them, I don't know if I will still be able to live there. So I ask that the committee please address this confusing issue regarding duplexes and to protect the tenants living in Mountain View. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Connor O'Brien. I'm a Mountain View resident and renter, and I recognize this is still early in the process for this, but I'm concerned about some of the changes that I've heard discussed either here or previously, and I hope you'll encourage the council not to pursue some of them. So in particular, I think it would be a mistake to allow higher rent increases across the board than the current limit of the CPI. The current rent that even covered tenants are paying is already very high in a lot of cases, and there's already, as other folks have referenced before me, a process for ensuring a fair rate of return in individual cases as well as vacancy decontrol. So I don't think that's necessary. I hope you'll also advise against any other protections that would, any other changes that would weaken the protections currently provided, such as narrowing who's eligible, weakening just cause, et cetera, as folks before me have referenced as well. Also, with respect to the issue of incentives in new housing, which I think was referenced before me, it's important to note that since the CSFRA can't apply to new housing under state law, I don't really think that should be a consideration. I do think there have been some changes that have been raised that are more productive, especially in terms of expanding who's covered to include duplexes, mobile home parks, et cetera. So I hope that regardless of whether it's part of this measure or outside of it, you'll take a closer look at doing those sorts of things. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Job Lopez, a resident of Mountain View. I am a homeowner, thank God, but I have been in support of my brothers and sisters who have to pay rent. And tonight, I am here to, first of all, to thank you for all the good work you have been doing since the RHC committee was established as a result of the passing of Measure B. I'm worried about the initiative that will appear either in March or November to make changes for Measure B. Changes that are not going to help my brothers and sisters who have to pay rent. So I am urging you not to allow the weakening of just cause eviction, for instance. We all know that Measure B has been helping many tenants in Mountain View and therefore has been helping our city. I am urging you not to allow to change the CPI 3% to 5%. It is true that some landlords have high expenses, but they have to justify to you that they really need to face or more financial help to face those expenses. I am urging you not to allow the city council the power to modify the CSFRA. Whenever changes are needed and justified, it will be up to the voters of Mountain View to do those changes. But never, never we want the city council to take over, to make those changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sonia Siqueiros, and I'm just want to say that Measure B is protecting our community. Don't weaken its protections. If you try to weaken renters' protections, the community will work hard to oppose these changes.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Philip Cosby, a member of the Cafecito at St. Athanasius Church, and also a housing provider here in Mountain View for the past 34 years. I'm here tonight to remind everyone that the CSFRA has been working quite well for the past couple of years, and I commend the Rental Housing Commission for guiding it through that period. I caution about making any substantive changes to it to eliminate the protections that it offers the tenants here in Mountain View. And those protections came as a result of year after year after year of huge rent increases. Don't forget that. And don't put us in a position where we'll go back to that. At present, landlords can make a profit, perhaps not as large as they might like, but certainly enough to stay in business. There are certain improvements that could be made in the present CSFRA. We've heard about this dilemma with the duplex definition. I mean, that seems ridiculous that you could have a full apartment complex of duplexes that somehow are exempt from the CSFRA. We could tweak that definition. Also, in the staff report, staff had a good recommendation for having a registry of rental units. That is worthwhile pursuing, I believe. And then finally, regarding the 2020 initiative, the staff report to the subcommittee, and Anki touched on it in her presentation today, noted that that initiative would eliminate the Rental Housing Commission if the vacancy rate exceeded 3%. And the graphic shows that over the past 10 years, the rate has been 4% or higher. So it would never have kicked in over the past 10 years with the 2020 initiative guidelines. That's ridiculous, as is the rest of the initiative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Buenas noches, mi nombre es Arturo Palma.
Good evening, my name is Arturo Palma.
Soy miembro de la comunidad de San Joseph
I'm a member of the St. Joseph's community.
y tengo 19 años viviendo en Mountain View.
And I have lived in Mountain View for 19 years.
Muchísimas gracias a todos por todo su trabajo que han hecho con la medida B y apoyarnos a los inquilinos.
Thank you to everyone here for Measure B and for always supporting us as renters.
Estoy aquí para recordarles que este tipo de medidas, estos apoyos que hemos recibido, benefician muchísimo a las familias.
I'm here to remind you that the measures that are here and that you give us really help the families in this community.
Mi familia se compone de 5 miembros, mi esposa, yo y 3 hijos.
My family is a member of 5. It's myself, my wife, and 3 kids.
Tengo 2 hijas, que una va al college y otra está en una universidad en Sacramento.
I have 2 daughters, one that's in college and the other one's in the University of Sacramento.
Sacramento. Y anteriormente era para mí muy difícil sostener el costo de college y universidad antes de la medida B.
And it was very difficult for me to manage paying a rent and also paying for college prior to Measure B.
Yo tenía que trabajar aproximadamente 12-14 horas diarias
I had to work somewhere between 12 to 14 hours per day
para ajustar mis gastos y renta.
so I could make both rent and expenses.
Y casi no pasaba tiempo de familia ni podía asistir a preparación personal que la ciudad ofrecía.
I was unable to spend time with my family as well as make any type of preparations with anything that was needed here at the city.
Tampoco tenía la oportunidad de saber cómo iban mis hijos en la escuela porque siempre llegaba en la noche y estaban dormidos y no podía compartir con ellos.
I didn't have the opportunity to share or be with my children because I would come home late in the evening and I was not involved in any of their schoolwork.
Esta medida nos ha beneficiado muchísimo y apreciaría mucho que tomaran en cuenta la ayuda que beneficia a mucho más familias que a los dueños.
We have really benefited from this measure, and I'd like you to take into consideration my story and know how much this measure is also helping other families.
Entendemos que los dueños de viviendas tienen sus gastos y quieren mantener su estilo de vida, pero es mayoritaria el beneficio hacia las familias que hacia los landlords.
I understand that owners also want to make some type of return, but the benefits that we are getting is much larger as a renter with this measure than the benefits that an owner would get.
Dennos la oportunidad de que las familias, los que rentamos, tengamos la oportunidad de participar más en la comunidad, teniendo un poco más de tiempo.
Give us also more of an opportunity as renters to be more involved in the community by giving us more time.
Y no pasarnos, tanto el papá como la mamá, trabajando casi 12-14 horas diarias para poder sostener los costos de la familia.
And also, don't allow for a mom and dad to have to work 12 to 14 hours, both of us outside our home, and not also give time for our family and our community.
Muchísimas gracias por escucharme.
Thank you very much for listening to me.
Gracias, buenas noches.
Thank you.
She asked me if I need traduction, but I said no, maybe. I see. Okay, my name is Marta Tinajero. I live here in Montview for 28 years. I have two children, two born here. One is graduated from the college, from the university. The other is a star. They're already working. The point is, the rent control really helped us. We are very, very hard workers. My children are working very hard too for afford the rent. This initiative make me scary, make me worry about if any chance that they can affect or we need to pay more rent that we can afford, we need to move. We need to move another place. We live here for 28 years, and really we work hard. And please, please, the rent control works for many, many families. I saw sisters, brothers moving to another place. We don't want to move. And I think don't make change to the rent control. It works for many, many families. Thank you.
Thank you.
John McDonald, homeowner since 1960 in Mountain View, and I'm speaking for myself as well as advocates for affordable housing. I didn't intend to speak, but I feel I need to reiterate what AAH and I have said many times. A previous speaker misspoke when he talked about certain aspects of CSFRA that had negative impacts. First of all, CSFRA has not stopped construction of new housing. It's alive and well in Mountain View. There are multiple numbers of housing units in the pipeline. CSFRA covers rentals built before 1995 and just cause eviction up to the beginning of CSFRA. Therefore, it has no impact whatsoever on new housing, as was stated by a previous speaker. Actually, demolitions have not increased by any significant amount since CSFRA. The largest anticipated demolition was actually a gatekeeper before CSFRA began. So please don't be persuaded by misinformation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chris Chelberg, and I'm a renter here in Mountain View. I'd like a little bit of your time today. I'd like to follow up on some of the earlier comments revolving around duplexes and clarifying their status, especially when not actually inhabited by the owner. I'd also like to take a moment to speak up for people in mobile homes. As has been brought up by the staff presentation, this is a key focus of the City Council, and so any amendment adjustments in the ballot measure that would weaken CSFRA would basically be counterproductive. If you're expanding the CSFRA to include mobile homes and then suppressing it if the vacancy rate is above 3%, there is no point in doing the former or the latter because neither of them would help continue the stabilization of housing in the city of Mountain View. In general, I would like to echo many of the other speakers' words to have you oppose any efforts by the City Council or by those behind the ballot initiative to weaken the CSFRA. It's been a great weight lifted off of the minds of many renters that they don't have to worry about unscheduled rent raisings. One gentleman said that he's had 5 rent increases in the last 2 years, with more to come. And on the subject of the rental registry, which would allow for better information to be passed to both the City Council, to the Rental Housing Committee, and also to landlords and residents of the city, I would suggest that it's, given what I've heard both today and otherwise, there's a bit of a concern around how to ensure that all rental properties are properly accounted for in such a database. I strongly recommend that if there is any burden, that it be passed to landlords in terms of asking them to volunteer that information when they are making any sort of claim under the CSFRA to be exempted or otherwise. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hey, Alex Brown, Santiago Villa, North Bay Shore, Mountain View. Member of the Mountain View Mobile Home Alliance, though not speaking in official capacity. So yeah, I'm having flashbacks to 2016 when we came before City Council and the Measure V versus Measure W debate was on, and the outcome of the ballot initiatives was going to determine whether or not the city could act directly to affect mobile home protections or whether it would be covered by CSFRA once implemented. And I don't want that to happen again with this. I'm not saying that mobile homes need to be covered in the CSFRA in this ballot initiative or otherwise, but something needs to be done. Either a claim needs to be staked or renounced when it comes to protections for mobile homes so that it is unambiguous and something can happen. Having it be a question as to whether or not mobile homes are or are not included and need to be voted on again by the people of Mountain View is, oh my God, come on. It hurts. It hurts so bad. This is 5 years now. Okay, yeah. But also, it does not need to be put into the ballot. The thing that was voted on last February could be brought up for a new vote to reinterpret or interpret, given new findings, the text of the CSFRA to include mobile homes as defined as rental units in the amendment. Does need to happen as part of a ballot initiative brought to the city. If it is, please don't delay it. Don't stop the City Council from doing stuff. Please, just keep that in mind. Just keep in mind when drafting things that
if you're going to leave it ambiguous, that is an excuse for other people to not act and not pass ordinances and not even debate things, because they will leave it to a different committee if it's an option. So again, you can say just no, actually flat out no, period, no, and that leaves it open for someone else to act. Just, thank you, no.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Sandra Esparza, and I live here about 20 years, and I work here also. Live and work in Mountain View. I work for the district school. So I've been seeing so many families every year. So, and you know how much it really helps our community, because this is our community. This is the kids will be our community in 20 years, in 30 years. Maybe I'm not be here, but this is the kids you guys helping with this Measure B, because their parents, they can help and pay the rent. And also, I just let you know basis and what I've been asked people. So our renters, they're always afraid. They're really afraid to ask the landlords. Even my sister, she got scared. So we know that they're afraid to get the money back, to keep asking for rollback. And also, if you don't know, some of the renters, I still tell them that we have protection, we have Measure B. I especially tell individual. And also, they don't know that it's legal. So when they got the letter, they just pay it. And I say, no, this is not legal. So I just let you know that some of the renters, they still don't know there exists Measure B. And also, please, I'm asking you to support our rent register so you guys can support it. So this is really important. Thank you for listening. Have a good night.
Thank you.
I just want to close with something funny this meeting. I lived for 30 years in Mountain View. I left for 2 years, but I was staying out there 3 years ago with big boards saying, okay, we need rental control, and I left. When I come back, I knew we have rental control. I was excited, but I live in a duplex. Then I don't have rental control, and I was thinking, okay, I take a shower every day, and I start taking a shower from the head to the toe. This law is like taking a shower and leaving the head out. Thank you.
All right, and on that, we'll close public comment. Thank you for the comments. The next step would be to for us to debate and go through each of the items. If everyone is amenable, I think we'll begin with the subcommittee items. So Anki, do you have the list of just the subcommittee items that we could put up? Yeah, let's go one by one. Yeah. I see. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so for each item, I think we'll just go down the row and get anyone's feedback if you feel strongly about that item. And then, you know, if we have if we feel like there's consensus that's close, we can have a straw vote or give some structured feedback to the subcommittee. Otherwise, again, each individual committee member's feedback will be captured and sent to the subcommittee. And I see that there are subcommittee members in the audience, so they'll hear it straight from us. All right, so for this first item, relationship between RHC and the city, maybe we'll start down with Susan.
To me, this is really a clear, I honestly don't know what we can do about this. There was a lot of pressure in the subcommittee meeting of ways to manipulate our relationship with the city. And it seems to me the voters made it very clear that we're independent of the council. And I feel that it should remain that way. I don't think we need to muddy it, but I'd be interested to hear what everybody else has to say.
On to the next.
So it's my understanding we're a separate body. However, we are chosen by the mayor and the city council. So in some ways, that makes us a little related. I know there was a lot of press the first year that CSFRA was available for, in the press about certain members of the RHC, and was bantered back and forth about allegations. I don't know what was true and what was not. But it appeared, the city council didn't take any action. I don't know if they would if we were closer, if we were not an independent body. So I think my opinion is I can go either way, but I think there should be clear-cut rules about what the relationship would be, but I don't know that it matters to me either way.
All right, thank you. Let's go next to Emily.
So one of the things I kind of am thinking about is what is the status of the relationship between the RHC and the city? As far as I can tell, in terms of interaction between the city, it's mostly our staffers that interact with each other, and it is mostly maybe 2 or 3 letters between us. I remember a letter from then Mayor Siegel saying us, hey, let's get on those mobile home parks. I believe that was the only letter we ever got from the city. And I believe that we sent a couple of letters to the city. One was recently asking to have input for this upcoming possible measure. So I would like to see what the staff see as the issues between our relationships right now. I think one of the clearest ones that I've heard was City Council would like a clearer opportunity to remove us for bad behavior. How we can keep that and maintain an independent status. I do believe that we should have a status independent of City Council, despite some council members believing that we should be subordinate to them. And so I would, in terms of ease of staff, I think is probably where the larger issues of concern comes in. And I would like to hear more about staff feedback on, is there ways to improve that without going into a ballot initiative? Is there steps that we can take? What other examples of departments and committees and other gubernatorial bodies working together that we can do in order to improve that relationship, to apply to more accountability to each other and to ourselves? And the question is, would we need a ballot initiative for that?
And were you looking for feedback in the moment from Anki or Tim?
Yes, I would love
Okay.
I would love some feedback on those questions. There were some clear questions there.
That was a very deep and complex question to start off. But really, just to understand, you mentioned ease of staff. So are you talking about staff efficiencies city council staff could work with CSFRA staff? Is that the direction of your question? Or was it just greater cooperation?
It is my understanding that our staff works well with the staff with the city. So I don't see that there's an issue. However, if there is any issues, it would be nice to know if that needs to be something that has changed.
No, I don't think there's an issue on the staff level in terms of working together, but the basis of this question was just initially when staff was asking the CSFRA subcommittee, what potential items are you interested in pursuing in terms of potential amendments? All the members stated, well, we'll want to look at this relationship between the RHC and council. Not necessarily because there were any friction or inefficiencies, but it was just a general comment from the subcommittee in something that they would like to look at. So sorry, it doesn't necessarily address your question per se, But I just wanted to give you the background of this particular item.
Okay, Julian?
So I think I would agree with Susan to a large extent. I think that my sense of things to date is that there's been a pretty good collaborative relationship between the RHC and the City Council, and I think this meeting tonight is pretty good evidence of that, and I think we're kind of moving in the right direction. And so I think in terms of the priorities we might have and in terms of what we can do better with the RHC or potential changes, I would put that as something way down on the list. And if we figured out all these other issues, maybe we can get to this. So absent a very specific request from City Council or the subcommittee about something that really is kind of eating away at them that needs to be changed, I would say that there's not something at this time that I would recommend that we do, but also recognizing that we can always revisit this issue at some later date.
All right, thank you. I'd say my comments would be oh, sure, go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering, because we don't usually have a lot of council at our meetings, and I don't know how much they read all the reports, and would our relationship benefit if we had a quarterly report back or something like that?
I mean, I think, well, sorry.
We can
Go
make
ahead,
those, all these suggestions will go to the subcommittee, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are definitely ideas on probably how we can collaborate better. But otherwise, my opinion would be pretty much in line with everyone that, for a need to go to a ballot measure, you would have to be overturning something. I think that's in the current text that prevents them from doing something. And, if they see fit, they don't think they have the options to remove someone if they need to, or something along those lines. I don't think it's for us necessarily to say how that should be done. So if everyone's still kind of in the, they also don't see anything above the line that seems like it requires a, amendment. I'd say I'm in agreement there. The only thing I'd ask though is if Anki, if there's some way that we could operate better, or I know that we have office space, that's within the city, and we rent from the city. Is there anything in your mind that currently the CSFRA text prevents you from being more efficient, or because you have to have separate staff, or any improvements you would make?
The ones that we emphasize are in the back of the memo. Those are the most urgent ones for staff, for administrative ease.
On the monitoring and compliance side?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think if we're in agreement there. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads, so hopefully
I think
you got
we're
the...
all on the kind of the same page, yeah.
Sounds
We
good.
don't understand why it's on here.
So Tim, I mean, does that feedback suffice for that item?
I do believe the RHC has been very clear in their input regarding this particular issue.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to an item that's probably not going to be as cut and dry as that one. So the issue of mobile homes, and whether or not there should be an amendment or action should be taken to, make it more specific. I'll start at the other end this time with Julian, if you'd like to comment on that issue.
So this is obviously very contentious. My understanding of this is that typically mobile homes require a very specifically tailored set of regulations to handle the nuances of those types of structures and the land beneath them. And that is nowhere within the CSFRA. So I think it's very difficult from a practical standpoint to just foist, the CSFRA on top of the mobile home system and expect it to work properly. I don't think it was something that most voters believed would be covered by the CSFRA. As we've mentioned, you know, mobile homes are not mentioned in the CSFRA. The city attorney, when she presented her kind of overview of the ballot initiative, did not mention that mobile homes would be covered. And so it's difficult to see how now it would be appropriate or proper to take that additional step, given that background. However, as to the wisdom of whether the CSFRA should properly apply, rent control should properly apply to mobile homes, I think that's something that, you know, the city council should take up, and it's something that's appropriate, you know, for the ballot, because I don't think it was on the ballot before. And so if the, you know, the voters of Mountain View want mobile homes to be subject to rent control, that's great. I think that's up to the voters. I don't think they voted on that yet. And I think we would be overreaching if we extend the CSFRA in that manner. And I also think it would be very unwieldy and costly to try to draft kind of a very elaborate set of regulations that would properly handle mobile homes. So I think this is something that is a proper ballot initiative if the city council sees fit.
Thank you. And just to clarify, so do you have a preference on, you know, whether it should be a ballot initiative or an ordinance or something that city council tackles separately?
No preference.
Thank you. Emily.
So, surprise, surprise, I have a very different point of view of that. I was actually there, Alex, at that 2016 meeting at City Council where the mobile home park residents said, please help us. And where council replied saying, well, there are these ballot initiatives and we're not entirely sure how it's going to affect you guys. So we're gonna wait till we get these ballot initiatives and then we're gonna protect you. Lo and behold, 5 years later, they are still not protected. It is my belief that the people who voted for Measure V voted to also include mobile home parks. We don't have to relitigate this over again. It was a highly contentious issue among our board, and there's feedback. One of the reasons why I do believe that mobile home parks, when people voted for Measure V, that they believe that mobile home parks were included, is that when you look at the results of Measure V and where it passed and where it failed by precinct, you can see all the precincts where the mobile home parks were located, Measure V passed by an extraordinary amount. The highest performing precinct where Measure V performed at was precinct 2469. That is known as the North Bayshore precinct, covers Santiago Villa. They passed Measure V at 74.27%. So I believe when it comes to mobile home parks, we should be adding it in. If we are adding a ballot initiative to determine mobile home parks, it should be added in. When we were determining mobile home park regulations, or whether or not mobile home parks were covered under Measure V, we set a plan. Like if basically we are like, if Measure V does cover mobile home parks, we're going to do this with our regulations. We have those plans. So if we add that to the initiative, we have plans to implement it that way. The alternative is to say mobile home parks, put down an initiative, mobile home parks are not included, and leave it up to city council. I feel that is too risky for them. It has been 5 years since they asked this city for protection. 5 years, too long. So my belief is that mobile home parks should be included in Measure V, like it was intended to by the voters.
All right, thank you. Vanessa.
I was not living in Mountain View at the time that Measure V was passed, so I don't really have any experience on conversations between the voters and city council and how that all transpired. But now that we do have Measure V, I would have to agree with Julian that it doesn't seem to fit in the current structure of the CSFRA. With that said, I would recommend that City Council revisit some type of rent control measures for mobile home parks.
And do you have any preference on whether
Whether it should be
ordinance
part
or-
of a,
Yeah.
an amendment to the CSFRA or a separate ordinance, probably a separate ordinance.
Okay. All right, thanks.
So I was just thinking, 5 years ago, I considered buying a mobile home. And so Julian was talking about the nuances. It is a different structure. You don't own the land, but you do rent. And I think that Measure V didn't think of everything. Not all the categories, duplexes, short-term rentals, mobile homes are not specifically in the regulations. But it's a work in progress, and we're only 2 years in. And I think it's vital that those things that weren't thought of, that we give a lot of thought to. And I would definitely think that mobile homes are a natural fit, that it's not way out of our purview. Just as duplexes in a parcel of, 9 duplexes makes sense to be part of what we include. So I guess I have a personal side, just having really researched the details of it as a potential buyer. So I would vote to include.
And if it's not under the purview of the CSFRA, would you want that to be part of a ballot initiative
Well, I think it's interesting that the council put it as one of their primary goals, mobile homes. So it feels like both the council and the community are moving in this direction. And why create a separate structure just for mobile homes? Another bureaucracy for the city to administer. We already have ours, and it works.
All right, thank you for that feedback. So I think there was a healthy debate the last time we took on this topic, and it did, to my recollection, I think come down to a 3-2 decision. There are strong arguments on both sides, but I think, in my view, the CSFRA text and the edits that we were going to have to make to the CSFRA to make mobile homes covered in a way that seemed fair. There is just so much nuance that I personally, this is my personal belief, thought that the CSFRA was kind of a blunt instrument and did not have enough detail for that. But I was supportive of the stories that I heard for some sort of system that was better than what we have today. And as part of that process, we actually held a separate additional meeting after the first meeting where we decided not to extend rent control or the CSFRA to mobile homes, or say that we didn't believe that it did extend, in service of the fact that some people said that was going around the issue, or at least not providing a strong point of view. We actually had another meeting where we heard public comment again, and then decided, specifically and said, we believe that it is not covered, so that we weren't skirting the issue. And at my view, again, at that time, was that then we were giving the green light to City Council to either take action themselves and take all of the information that we had and put that into something where they had more flexibility because we were bound by the terms of the CSFRA, or have a ballot initiative. So I would very much support City Council taking action on this issue, again, outside of the bounds of where I feel we were hamstrung a bit with what the text of the CSFRA says and the edits and deletions that we were going to have to make that our legal team spent many hours coming up with. So, my personal view on this, and then we'll kind of see if we can come together with some sort of alignment, is to take all that good work that our legal team did in trying to figure out how state law overlaps with, mobile home residency law and the CSFRA, and enable council to come up with, a plan that can really work, and not to, per someone's comment, not continue to skirt the issue. I would like to see a resolution. But sounds like you have some comments.
So yes, do we really want to spend RHC money on that?
Sorry, in what way?
Of having council look into it again, because that would be borne by the housing providers.
Right, sorry. And I would like everyone to kind of, if you have ideas where it sounds like we're getting consensus around a recommendation for the subcommittee, I was thinking we would take all of the groundwork that our legal team has done and pass that over to the subcommittee and city council, not necessarily to have our legal team do additional work.
Okay, and then one other sort of side comment, and that is, I'm not so sure that we have to have a consensus. I think we're just giving information to you. Is that correct? So it does not have to be a consensus, because we have different opinions, and I think all the different opinions should be passed on, not just a consensus. My personal opinion.
Well taken, for sure. I was just wondering if there is a majority that would align on something, then we could put our thoughts behind some statement. But again, not necessary.
I think they're very different, and
Okay.
out of respect to Emily and also to Julie, and I think that the different opinions should be passed through.
Tim, thoughts?
Yeah, you are exactly correct. Each commissioner's or committee members' thoughts or input will be listed individually, so that the subcommittee will be able to see individual discussions on each of these topics.
Okay, all right. Any other comments to that point? Any other comments on maybe the specifics of what you'd like to see? I had a few notes here on issues that I remember coming up during the debates. If there's anything that anyone would like to kind of pass through to the council to pay specific attention to, as far as mobile homes related.
Oh.
Just specifically mobile homes.
Actually, I'd like to leave that up to the city council.
We do differ on many things when it comes to mobile home parks, but I do get a sense that all of us want the mobile home parks to have some sort of protections, whether it's done through Measure B or through council, and that would be a good thing to at least let council know that our committee does believe that mobile home residents deserve some protections.
Julian, anything specific?
And maybe I would just follow up on the point that was being made before, that to the extent we have generated work product towards enacting a set of regulations for mobile homes, that perhaps we would be, I can only speak for myself at this moment, but we would be willing to share that work product with the subcommittee, so that to the extent they want to pick up that where we left off, it makes it a little easier for them and they're not reinventing the wheel.
Sure. The only detail I'd add is I think during the original debate, it seemed unclear, because of the relationship between mobile home structure owners and then park owners, how either a park owner or a structure owner who's renting a space would exit the market. I think Measure V is pretty clear about the options that someone has to petition or to exit the market, and I think that's one of the areas where there was a real lack of clarity. Vacancy decontrol on the what happens when, again, ownership passes from one structure owner to another. Any other comments? All right, we're moving right along here. So number 3 is the streamlined petition process. We will start, maybe I'll start with Vanessa for this one. Sorry to
Are
put
you
you on the spot.
sure you want to start with me? I think I've been rather outspoken about the petition process and how cumbersome it is and restrictive for a landlord owner to petition for an upward adjustment. I would totally agree that streamlined petition process should be part of an addendum or a new ordinance. I think it's cumbersome, and I think that that's why you see very few landlords, owners petition. So I would definitely believe that that should be part of the process.
May I ask for some clarification? Do you see the streamlined petition process for certain specific issues, or are you talking in general?
Both. I think we have seismic retrofits that are coming up. I manage properties in other jurisdictions for an owner, and some jurisdictions are making them mandatory already, and we're starting to look for financing on the soft story structures. It can be very expensive. There are several different ways that we can do that. I think if it becomes mandatory in the city of Mountain View, that definitely there should be a streamlined petition process for that. And many owners may decide for safety reasons, even if it's not mandatory, that that's something that they would like to do for their residents. So I think the petition process for an upward adjustment is very cumbersome, and I think that we could make it easier. And that's my opinion.
All right, we'll go to Susan.
I'd like to ask staff about this. You've been working through the petition process for a couple of years, and I wonder if you have thoughts about how to streamline it.
So the current petition process is based on the MNOI factors, and it requires that landlords provide documentation to prove their expenses and their income. So I think it's working in that regard. It's working with the formula. If you look at other jurisdictions, I think this is the most commonly accepted standard that there is out there in California jurisdictions. Having said that, there is also room for expedited petition process for, say, soft story retrofits. So if the Rental Housing Committee would like, we can do a more thorough analysis and show all these different types of expedited petition processes that are out there for what type of capital improvements with certain maximums amounts that some do provide, and certain, what do you call it, the 20-year or 10-year kind of a amortization. That's the word I was looking for. So there's little different details in these jurisdictions, but that is the general system that you see out there for some jurisdictions. And we can definitely put a more detailed report together for you if you like.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yes, please.
All right, let's go with Julian.
So I think the petition process now, as it's been implemented, is essentially punitive to landlords. I think it's unnecessarily onerous, and I don't think that's oftentimes inadvertent. I think there's an actual decision that's been made to make it as difficult as possible for some landlords to file petitions, and we know for a fact that there are landlords that have not filed petitions because of how onerous the process is. They've told us that. So I think if we want to have a system that's fair, you have to make it more streamlined. And I think of it's not a great analogy, but it's an analogy, I think, of, tax returns, where you submit, when you file your taxes, and I look at filing your taxes is basically a petition to get some of your money back from the government that they have. And if you think of your tax returns as a petition to the government for some kind of refund, I mean, how much documentation are you really submitting with your tax returns? So if I own, and putting aside if you're self-employed and you're a hedge fund or something, but if you're an individual who's not self-employed, and so if you own shares in Google and you sell those shares, you're just itemizing on the return what the price was that you bought it for, what you sold it for, and that's your capital gains. You're not attaching a photocopy of your share certificate from Google, if you ever had one, that shows that you own shares in Google. And most people would think it'd be ridiculous to do that. Why would you make someone substantiate that ownership in that way? There's other ways to do it. One way is to have people, under penalty of perjury, state that what they are submitting is truthful. So I think, when you think about what some of these petitions require, it should never be more cumbersome and difficult than someone's tax returns. And if I can satisfy the IRS with kind of minimal documentation, I think that the RHC should also be able to do with the same amount or less documentation. And I realize I might be oversimplifying it a bit. And I think we might even consider a process, similar to an audit, where you've got a certain amount of documentation that you don't have to submit, but if there's a hearing officer or whoever that decides to call you out and ask for supporting documentation, then you have to present it. But otherwise, showing up with a banker's box full of invoices and receipts and all of this stuff, I don't know where that really gets us, other than making life miserable for landlords. So I think a streamlined process would make sense. I think it should be as simple as possible. It should be on a single piece of paper. We've tried one way, so maybe the pendulum should shift the other way. So that's my general thought.
All right, thank you. Emily?
So I've been thinking about the whole streamlined petition process idea. One for capital improvements, one as a general concept. I think it would be important for the RHC to give, or at least our staff for the RHC to essentially give an overview to council on how our petition process works. A recent conversation with another council member when he talked about, we would like to streamline the process. And I'm just like, how does that look to you? And he really couldn't answer me because he didn't know what our petition process was. So it would be nice to let council know how our petition process works, what kind of timeline it is, so that when they look at how are we streamlining this process, should we change it, you should know it before we change it. That's one of those important things. Another one is to probably let them know we accepted our first petition, I believe, toward the end of 2017, correct? We are now in 2019, and we've gone through some significant and vast improvements since our first petition. It is understandable the frustration that many landlords had with us toward the beginning as we were trying to get all our stuff together. These regulations making it easy. And over time, our staff, which one of you kind of has the best staff ever, has been able to slowly improve this process for the landlords and for tenants when they submit their downward adjustment, rents, petitions. So I think it is important to pass that on to council, to let them know that some of the issues when we initially started are not the same issues we have now, because it didn't take that long for us to get a lot of this stuff together. Now, in terms of the streamline process, it goes back to a question in the subcommittee is what problem are we trying to solve? Like, what is onerous? What is, what will council consider onerous comparatively to how staff has interacted with landlords and housing providers and tenants? What feedback have they received of what are possible, what are improvements that have to be done through a ballot initiative? I mean, that's the same question we're going back constantly with all these improvements. Any improvements we do in terms of streamlining this petition process, is it necessary to go through a ballot initiative? And I think that's something that I want to make sure that council has a clear answer for, and an understanding of what our purview as RHC are able to do in terms of making this as streamlined as possible. One of the things that have been mentioned was the seismic retrofits. Is my understanding of legal counsel that if somehow it doesn't get on a ballot, if somehow the ballot initiative fails, we do have a plan of dealing with it, correct?
We think that we could incorporate a streamlined petition process for mandatory seismic retrofits. We do have to fit it within the framework of the current CSFRA, so we do have to tie it back to fair rate of return.
Okay.
So an amendment that made it clear that it could just be a standalone might simplify things.
It might, but I do think it might be important that we let council know how that looks like comparatively. So if they have a choice, do we put this as an amendment on the ballot? This is the alternative if we don't.
All right, thank you. Any other comment? Vanessa?
I think our base year for the current petition process is 2015, right? We're getting ready to go to 2020 in a minute, a few months. Does that make the petition process more cumbersome because we have to show year over year, and that more years that we go past 2015 means more?
Yeah.
And are we currently asking for copies of canceled checks, or are we asking for paid invoices with check numbers on them as part of the process? One more question, and then I'm good. And if I have an invoice for $105, do I have to, there's a lot of invoices for $105 or more, do I have to provide all of that information for all of those years?
So as to the first question, the base year 2015, the current CSFRA and petition process asks for information of the base year and the current year in which you ask for an extra rent increase. So if you're filing your petition in 2019, you need to provide information about 2015 and 2019 and kind of an overview of the years in between, which could be a one-pager copy of your tax return or any other document that you have as an overview of the years.
Yeah, and we've had some discussion, I believe, on what constitutes management fees or what are salaries for on-site staff. I mean, it has become very cumbersome. How many pages would you say an average petition of 10 units and more would be?
There is no average. This specific issue came up in front of the Rental Housing Committee because you heard an appeal on that specific issue. I do not recall it being an issue in other petitions, but I cannot remember all the details of each petition.
Okay.
And yes, documentation currently does need to be provided to provide evidentiary documentation of all the amounts that are being filled in a petition process.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So I heard a lot of feedback, I think, on generally on the petition process. And I know we've discussed a lot of those drawbacks at length in the past. I think to give my specific feedback to the subcommittee on, I think one of the topics they're specifically interested in, which is the seismic retrofit streamlined petition, or if they want to broaden that to safety items that are forced upon all of Mountain View, then I would be very supportive of having that be part of an amendment, because based off of our previous study sessions, it sounds like you would not be, let's say you had this $50,000 charge for doing a seismic retrofit. Currently, that would have to be rolled into everything else that you're doing, even if the city makes it mandatory for all of properties. That was my take. And that I think makes it a good candidate for a specific amendment, especially if this is something that the council wants to bring forward and require of all landlords. Also, I think there's a precedent for pass-throughs in other jurisdictions that we don't really have the detail in the CSFRA. If council, I'm not sure how much I think it's my perception that there are a lot of more specific pass-through rules related to this that other jurisdictions have that CSFRA doesn't really account for. Is that correct?
Yes, so there's a whole variety of different ways people handle it, as we've discussed here. Some jurisdictions allow pass-through of a portion of the fee. Some jurisdictions allow pass-through of a portion of special assessments or special taxes that may be imposed on property, parcel taxes, that kind of thing. So pass-throughs of certain capital improvements are allowed in some jurisdictions, some with a formula, some with a petition. So it runs the gambit in the different jurisdictions.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'd say take some of that material, or I'd recommend to the subcommittee that they look at other jurisdictions, and my goal or my ask would be to try to come up with something that makes the owner or landlord whole from what they've spent to make the upgrade, but not necessarily punishing the tenant in perpetuity or in some outsized way. So that's specifically regarding the pass-through, regarding the seismic retrofit. I think then, Anki, we had a few other situations where we had discussed the pass-through previously that people were supportive of, but within the constraints of the CSFRA, we didn't pursue. Did we already have it?
We had a very long discussion about the pass-through of the fees, and we didn't feel that the CSFRA with its current language allowed for a pass-through. So that's not my understanding on the council subcommittee's list, but it could be something that this committee suggests to them.
Got it. Yeah, that actually had that on my list for later, that the fee does cut into, we heard this from many landlords, especially of smaller units, that the fee can actually cut into the 3.2% or the percentage that they're guaranteed on a year-over-year basis. So we'll tackle that later on how the fee might be restructured in a way that seems more fair, at least in my opinion. But otherwise, I mean, generally speaking, I do think we've made improvements on the general petition process. And I'd also be interested if there is a way, I think we mentioned this a long time ago, but if there's a way to have ranges for, let's say, landscaping on a per unit basis, if there is a way to have something that's pretty standard, some sort of expense that a lot of people make without having people to find canceled checks and that sort of thing. That it's more on the audit. If we could do things on an audit basis, where if an amount seems unbelievable, the hearing officer is, definitely has the freedom to go through and to check the validity of that and to ask for proof and documentation. But otherwise, it did seem from what we heard that, to have every single charge be, to have proof for that, I'd like to see, less paperwork on that side, but also have a system that prevents abuse. Sorry for my feedback there. That was a lot. All right. So if there's no other feedback on that topic, then it's pretty much open. It is almost 9 o'clock, getting there.
I've got one
sure.
question for council, just to clarify. So as of right now, if the city council took no further action regarding the soft story retrofits, would we have, so that it's not mandatory, so it's still, optional, would we have the authority, the RHC have the authority then to allow for the costs of those retrofits to be factored into an upward rent adjustment by way of a regulation we would enact or a policy choice, or is that something that we would still have to look to a city council for?
Under the CSFRA as it's currently written, you would be able to look at it for a potential rent increase because it would fall under the definition. The capital improvements that are allowed to be considered as one of the factors include capital improvements affecting health and safety. And I think it would fit under there. But all of the individual rent increases have to fall ultimately under a fair return standard. That's the ultimate requirement of the CSFRA. So as we talked about, I think when we talked about this at your meeting in June, we think there's a way to do a streamlined petition for those type of improvements without an amendment to the CSFRA. But it's not going to be probably as streamlined as you all would hope because we still have to tie it back to fair return. So we're going to need some information from property owners to get us back there. Just to make it fit. We have some ideas, we really need to work through it, and I think at our meeting when we talked about it, since the council still is considering it, we have put it on hold.
Would it be fair to say that it would be cleaner if it came through, a ballot initiative, or is that, can you say?
Well, I think, if you remember when you met with Richmond, their rent scheme is a little bit different. And they're allowed to do rent increases on individual rent increases on a variety of bases, and one of those is capital improvements. And that's similar, like Oakland has that too. It doesn't have to be tied to a fair return. It's if you've done capital improvements, they fit into a certain category. You still petition, but you basically are entitled to a rent increase that's amortized. If the CSFRA were more similar to that, it would be, it would essentially be a capital improvement petition. So that's what the hearing officers would be looking at is, did you install the capital improvement? Was it necessary? Was it over improvement? What's the amortization period? It makes it simpler.
Okay. So I think just my one thought on that would be that if we were to take action, it would be likely a lot quicker than if this was a ballot initiative. So to the extent that there's a concern in the community that, these soft story retrofits are something that's really needed, if we can accelerate the process by a year or two rather than waiting for this to be on the ballot, then I think that's just something to take into account, that we can act faster in that regard.
That's great feedback. And that actually brings up, I think if we could request that there be flexibility so that it's not just specifically made for for a seismic retrofit, but if the RHC deems fit in the future for something that we can't plan for now, that we have the ability to create a streamlined process for separate types of them. So, we don't have this again in the future. The other thing that does is it helps us avoid overwhelming demand of petitions for a single topic, where our costs and our budget is variable. At least our variable costs are very much dependent on the volume of petitions that we have. So our budget could be blown if there's an issue very specific like this, that all of a sudden 100 petitions come through. Yeah, sure.
I have a thought, and on that same topic is perhaps on these streamlined petitions, they may not need to go in front of a hearing officer for approval. Just an idea.
Yeah, I mean, if there's, to piggyback on that, if there's a way for the RHC to avoid avoid costs, if there's a formula that can be created, or perhaps if they give us the structure or in the amendment, the ability to create these streamlined processes on our own, then we can have that control. That would be helpful. The last piece I had is to specifically think about the indirect cost from something like this. So when a tenant doesn't have access to a parking space for several months, hopefully that's included in what I would say the effort to make the owner whole. So if they had to find alternate parking or there was some sort of suspension of services that City Council, when writing the amendment, would find a way to help those owners, again, be made whole if they spent money to provide alternate parking and not just for the construction cost of the seismic retrofit. Sure, Emily.
So in terms of pass-throughs, I didn't view it as part of the streamlined petition process, so I'll just put it in the other bucket. I guess could be a little bit of both. One thing I'm wanting to look at in pass-throughs is if there are pass-throughs for capital improvements, perhaps looking into if they're allowing an increase in terms of a pass-through, seeing if there's a sunset for it. So for example, if we are doing seismic retrofits, and it's a certain amount of cost, and you split it up between your tenants for a certain amount of years, and they recoup the cost of the retrofit, that there's something in it that is not a permanent pass-through. And I'm actually kind of curious if there's anything in our regular petition process that allows for something like that. I remember at some point we heard a downward adjustment of rent petition. And when the downward adjustment was granted until the landlord fixed what was wrong, and then it was back to its original amount. Do we have something like that with our petition process in terms of any upward adjustment issues?
Well, you don't have it with an upward adjustment because your upward adjustment petitions are all related to fair return. So they don't, it's considered like you have to create that baseline, and that's a perpetual baseline. With capital improvement petitions, most other jurisdictions do have a sunset that it goes for the amortization period or when the unit becomes vacant. That is the typical with vacancy decontrol.
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments on the streamlined petition process? All right. So, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I don't remember this, but we had this issue, and I'm pretty sure that staff is totally on top of this, but just in case you guys aren't, when we did the CPI and we were looking at the different types of CPI, like the federal, and then it was like March to March, April to April, we're gonna fix that, right?
What part would you like to fix?
I remember that we had this issue when we were doing our CPI, and like it's in the charter amendment, it was like supposed to be from April to April, but like the federal government only.
April,
We're gonna fix that, right?
We'll ask the subcommittee.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Sorry, Julian.
Last thing, I promise. So would it make sense to perhaps invite any member of the public that wanted to present a proposed, streamlined petition process to just submit that to us or to staff for consideration? It sounds like we all have in the abstract, we understand kind of what we want, but actually to articulate it is difficult. And I just think if anyone had an exemplar or something that they wanted to present, competing streamlined petitions, I don't know that it would cause any harm, so I'm just putting it out there.
Just to comment on that.
Clarification,
Yeah.
there is a stakeholder meeting next week in front of the subcommittee maybe that would be a good venue to bring those stories.
I'd like to recommend, since we're in the discussion of CPI, is we tied it to housing for purposes of the upward adjustment. I would personally like to recommend that the subcommittee look at using housing for the CPI for AGAs.
So let's.
Personally, not on, well, as a member of the RHC, I would like to make a recommendation, not as the totality of the RHC.
Sure. Actually, I mean, so we're in that part of the. If there's no other comments on the the streamlined petition process, we're in that time where we can recommend topics that we'd like to go over. I would. We could take a 5-minute break, actually, if people are amenable. And then I think with the process, we would come back, go through quickly the remaining issues that we'd want to get through, knowing that, let's try to hit 10, 15 if we can. That's my, that's where I turn into a pumpkin and I need sleep.
So what is next after we've gone through these is to do other recommendations?
So I'd say we try to get 5 topics, agree on what we're going to talk about, and then we go through those 5 topics. And that can include some of the issues that staff has identified or other issues, like you mentioned, the CPI. We can just decide what we're going to discuss. And then any individual feedback on top of that, anyone's welcome to email the subcommittee directly or present it to staff, and staff can do it as well. But yeah, I'd say if that works for everyone. So we'll take a 5-minute break and then come back. Just those little Trader Joe's. They're kind of like kind of pre-made, but you put the stuff on them. It's good. It's much better than like your your DiGiorno. All right, let's bring it back. All right. Actually, nope, we're still. Is Julian in the room? Oh. Oh, no, that's Lucas. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So we will, first we'll come up with a list of the topics we want to cover. Also, Anki, should I move, should I have the vote to move those two topics after this item, or do that now? Okay, so point of order, or I can't remember the rules and what I'm supposed to say, but I'd like to move items 8.1 and 8.2 to our next meeting on September, or August, no, we have another meeting on August, September 16th. They are, yes, they are the tenant buyout agreement process and the quarterly financial expenditures.
I'll second that.
Oh, sorry. I don't know if I'm allowed to make a
So
motion.
if it's second,
You are allowed to make a motion.
Oh, okay, great. So I made the motion, and then I think we have a second, if that's okay.
for discussion, it would be nice to know, is anyone in the audience here just for the tenant buyout? Okay, so we're good.
Good point. Thanks for covering me on that. All right, all in favor? All right, sounds good. So we can use the rest of our time for discussion of the topics that we will enumerate now. Maybe let's just go down the line. 3 topics, including anything from staff that, let's say, which of the topics from staff you would like to talk about, or that you feel strongly about, and then any other topics that you would like to cover in the next, let's say, hour. So we'll start with, I'll move down here. So Emily, let's start with you.
For in terms of if this is including what staff has asked for, applicability of exemptions for single-family homes and duplexes. One of the things I would like to know is how many units are affected by this weirdness of exemptions. Yes.
Oh,
so are we?
I think we're
going
we're just
yeah, yeah,
enumerating
yeah.
the items now. Yeah, thank you.
I would also like to go over monitoring and compliance. And in terms of the third issue, I mean, I would love to go over this, the changes in the short-term rentals. But I guess in terms of higher priority, I would love to see how we can make changes to the CSFRA without going to the ballot. Like, if there is a change in the language with the CSFRA so that we could apply some flexibility. I know that council was looking at that. They wanted an idea that council can change it with a supermajority. I would also like to slip in there if there's any changes that the RHC can do. So those would be my three topics. Flexibility, what would be not too, how do I say this? Not be a Pandora's box, but some minor tweaks which will allow us to do some minor tweaks so we don't have to go to the ballot every 2 years when we find something that's interesting that should change.
And also, sorry for the constraint of 3, but is there anything else you feel really strongly about that would be your fourth?
Quite honestly, if staff feels that there should be some clarifications with short-term rentals, I think we should listen to staff about that.
All right. So let's go to Julian.
So for me, it would be duplexes, short-term rentals, and whether the rental housing fee can be passed along to tenants.
All right. Susan.
I would like to do duplexes, including, I never remember the name, the mother-in-law units. Accessory dwellings, right. Monitoring and compliance, because I think we should be retrieving more data. And I think, I'm hoping that staff can, that we can, with staff, make clarifications that don't require input by council or ballot initiative. I would not like to take up short-term rentals with the 10-foot pole. I have experience as I rented out a room through Airbnb very successfully, but I know that cities want to get into that, and that landlords feel that they're being ripped off if people are renting out. I think it's a very sticky thing to get into, so I would recommend us let that go for a while.
All right, thank you. Vanessa.
I don't have any additional items to bring up other than what's been mentioned here. I'm usually less inclined for regulations, as I think everybody knows. So I'm fine with those items.
All right. So I mean, I think we have, unless I'm missing anything, 5 potential items that people would like to talk about. I'm also supportive of talking about the fee, and I think the idea of a backdoor, I guess, for there to be changes that are necessary based on some sort of supermajority. I think that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that before. So I think it sounds like based on popularity, the duplex ADU single-family home issue would be number 1. Then we'll go through to, looks like, monitoring compliance, the fee, short-term rentals, and then that supermajority. That sounds like a good work list. We can start with those.
Want to go through one at a time?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think for the first one, we will, the definition of single-family homes and duplexes. Anki, did you want to, is there any specific area where you wanted to get comment or where you thought that
Well, I
specific
would like
recommendations?
for council to explain why it's currently the only way to explain the definitions of exemptions for single-family homes and duplexes. And since quite a few of you ask what changes can we make without having to go to a ballot, maybe you can address that situation for this issue, if possible.
Maybe. Okay, so the issue with duplexes and single-family homes gets to the way the definitions are defined in the CSFRA. So with respect to duplexes, the language is very specific. It's rental units in a single structure with fewer than 3 dwelling units. It doesn't say rental units with fewer than 3 dwelling units on a single parcel. And that's where the problem comes in. So as you heard from some of the speakers on public comment, there are properties with multiple duplexes where the duplexes are exempt, but if there's a single-family home on that same property, it's not, or if there were a triplex on that property, that would not be exempt. So you have people living in a single complex treated differently. And, you know, we suspect this was just a bit of a oversight in drafting. So this is something that if there were to be amendments to the CSFRA, this could be cleaned up. Similarly, when single-family homes are exempt, and companion units as defined in the Mountain View Code are exempt, but then when you start working through those permutations, you come up with some of the anomalies that were discussed in the staff report, where you could have a companion unit, an ADU, that's a separate unit that's exempt, but then the single-family home is not exempt because of the definitions. So this is, it really is cleanup. But because the CSFRA was voter approved and it's a charter amendment, it can't be amended without a vote of the people. And that's my understanding. I would have to do more research, but we don't think that it can be amended even with like a supermajority vote. And whether that could be embedded into a charter amendment is something we would have to look into.
All right. So with that background, maybe we'll, on this specific topic of the definitions of single-family home, duplex, and exemptions, we'll start with Susan. Would you be,
Oh, gosh.
to comment on...
Can I pass? I mean, I'd like to
Sure.
think about it for a minute.
Sure.
I mean, it sounds like we can't do anything about this situation without charter amendment.
Well, I think what the subcommittee is asking is if, or one of the options is to suggest to the subcommittee if they're going to think about a ballot amendment, this is an area
To include.
that should be addressed.
Okay.
Sorry, did you still want to pass? And we'll come back.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should recommend to council that it be included if there is such a ballot measure.
Okay, all right.
I'm less inclined to include single-family homes or units with 3 or less units on a parcel.
Sorry, so I think...
So right now, the CSFRA exempts single-family, duplexes, and triplexes? Is that my understanding?
No, it does not exempt triplexes. It exempts single-family. It exempts companion units, which would be ADUs,
Right.
and it exempts duplexes, which are 2 units in a single structure.
Okay, it's my opinion that we should not put that on a ballot.
What if, in the case that several of the commenters mentioned, where you know there are 6 duplexes on one parcel, in those cases, would you
In
be
those
open-
cases, I think that should be part and parcel of a ballot measure.
Great.
But just to have the CSFRA cover single-family homes and duplexes and ADUs, I do not think it should be covered.
Sorry. Yes. Okay. I understand your point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great. So we'll move to Emily.
So in terms of this exemption, thank you for the commenters who have brought this to our attention. Didn't realize that this was a possibility. So I agree with the previous two colleagues that we should look into including essentially this scenario where you have separate structures of what I'm understanding. It's separate structures into on a single parcel where the owner does not live in any of those structures. Is that correct? That you're shaking your head. That's not correct.
I think this is, so currently if you have more than one duplex on a property, all the duplexes are exempt. Would you like to recommend to change the definition of duplexes? So one duplex on a property is exempt, but if there are more than one duplexes on a property, should that be exempt or not exempt? That's the one.
That is your one change that you recommend. So I concur with staff's recommendation and my colleagues. I think that's probably the easiest way that's probably the easiest way we can make this change, correct?
That's fine. And then the second scenario is when single-family homes have an adjacent structure on the same legal parcel, all of a sudden they are non-exempt. Would we want to keep them exempt even if there is another ADU on the property or not?
So if I can interject, I think this all gets to how duplexes are defined in the CSFRA because they're defined really narrowly, whereas in a lot of rent control legislation in other jurisdictions, typically what's exempt is if there are fewer than 3 units on a single parcel. And if you amended the CSFRA to define it that way, it would take care of both problems. So if you had a single-family home with an ADU, whether it's attached or detached, they would both be exempt. If you had a duplex, whether it's attached or detached on a single parcel, they would be exempt. But if you had multiple duplexes on a single parcel, they would not be exempt. So it's the fact that duplexes got defined as in a single structure that causes the problem.
Thank you for that.
Based on that, is there anything you two would like to clarify?
No, I think I'm in agreement with council.
Okay, great. So Julian.
So I don't know that I have a whole lot to add, but I mean, I think that some of the arguments by the speakers tonight were very persuasive as to why duplexes should properly be covered, but I think that does run flat into the actual language of the text. And I don't see how we can kind of get around that on our own. And I think, frankly, even if we tried to do it, it wouldn't be the right thing to do because, you know, once we start redefining the actual plain language in the act, we do it once, we can do it to anything, and we've completely changed the act and essentially superseded what the voters were voting for. So I think if we could do it all over again, this could be better written, and duplexes would be defined more clearly, and this issue would have been resolved at the outset. But I think now this is action that needs to go by way of the ballot, and I think kind of a related issue while people are considering it is what is the base year going to be, and how do you kind of work out that thorny issue of when to start the whole process of calculating that. And I'm glad that we will not be dealing with it, I think.
Sure.
So I'm a little confused. Do we have the authority to change the definition?
No, the CSFRA would have to be amended. Okay. So this would be a recommendation of the council subcommittee if they're considering a ballot measure.
All right. Just for me to respond to what everyone else has said, I think we're all in agreement that this situation doesn't seem to be in the spirit of the CSFRA, and that I think it sounds like there are some options that City Council could use to clean that language up. I would say, I have several neighbors who do have multiple structures in their backyard, sheds, storage, and people may or may not be living in those. And I think so. Just for the language, I think we should be clear that it would be structures for rent, where even where it's not rented to a family member, you could see where they have a structure. There's a parent living in one, then the other structure is rented by someone else outside the family. And I think it sounds like the spirit of the CSFRA is that for those small owners, rent control shouldn't apply. I would like to keep that with the language, keep that spirit. I'd also even say for the parcels that have like 9 duplexes, if a landlord is living in one of those duplexes, I think they should get a credit for that specific unit. Again, if all the other duplex owners who are living next to someone are not subject to rent control, it seems like you could have at least one property that's not subject to rent control in that situation. And then the base year, I think, is very interesting. So I think at this point, going back to 2015 would be a heavy lift for a lot of these for an owner. I think City Council should definitely, or the subcommittee should think about that and how to handle it in a fair way, because you've got a lot of backlog there.
Maybe it can start effective immediately versus the 2015. Is that what your thought process is on that?
I think I'd leave it up to them, I guess, to try to find a fair way. But
so not necessarily would it have to be 2015 as a base year? There could
correct.
be other
Yeah.
regulations.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Any other topics or comments on that topic? Okay. Next one would be I had monitoring and compliance. So again, Anki, I think it's good if you could kind of specify the major points under that topic that you'd like to have addressed.
So under mentoring and compliance, I think we are already halfway there. We are working hard on getting a database in place. It would be great if we could get more input from the landlords by filling out the information that they have about their rental property and the rental units, and that would help us being able to monitor more precisely how the rent control is or is not effective in the city of Mountain View. Moreover, since it's a complaint-based program, so this would just give us at least some information on where we are with the program in the city of Mountain View.
And did you have any specific asks or recommendations on fields that should be required or mandatory or?
Sure. What we, and then we always look at other jurisdictions, what do they do, what do they ask, what kind of information are landlords supposed to fill out. It would help already tremendously if they fill out, first of all, the property information, but then also the per unit information. And when units become vacant, because that's a good way of keeping track of the vacancy percentage, other than just relying on outside data.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Elke?
So I have a question. So when a tenant moves out, you want that to be reported?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. We'll start at that end with Julian. Or you can pass.
I have nothing to say about that.
Okay. Emily?
I support staff's recommendation to increase monitoring and compliance for the CSFRA. I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to go through the whole portal. It was a very nice, fun demo. Nothing broke. Always a good thing. But I do remember that you mentioned that we have, an 8% of how many of the landlords actually use it. It's relatively easy to use, and I'm sure at some point we'll get a higher percentage, but we'll get we've done a good job getting our housing providers to comply with things like the rental fees and stuff like that, that I think it wouldn't be that much of a hindrance to ask them to comply with this data gathering effort. And I think we all benefit by having this information. So I agree with, I would love to see that portal of the rental units used a lot more so that we have better data to make our decisions.
All right, Susan?
I was wondering if there's some sort of incentive we could give. I don't have any ideas at the moment, but I know we talked about this and we didn't want it to go mandatory, that they're required to register. So,
Required right now.
right? So is there anything
Yeah, they're not required right now, and the one way that landlords do want to fill it out is because they have to, if they want to file for an exemption, they have to register, so that is a good incentive for property owners that are not requesting an exemption. It's hard to come up with an incentive, I would say.
Just to interject briefly, some other jurisdictions have methods of encouraging voluntary compliance related to pass-throughs of rental housing fees. I know that's on your list to discuss. Some Southern California jurisdictions only allow pass-through of a rental housing fee if the landlord registers on time. Otherwise, it's precluded for the year.
I have a question. Do they register annually or? Because
Yes,
I know San Jose requires an annual, but when somebody moves out, they don't fill that out. They just, every year, once a year, there's a certain timeline. I think we just finished ours a couple of months ago. And once a year, we just give them a rent roll.
Yeah, different jurisdictions handle it differently. I was specifically thinking of Santa Monica, which has a more robust requirement
Yes,
to
they do. I've
provide
managed in
information.
Santa Monica, yeah.
But different jurisdictions can organize that differently, but it is annual for them.
I would probably recommend an annual rent roll, but every time somebody moves out, moves in, I don't think that we need to be reporting that to the city of Mountain View. Oh, one more thing. Can we have more staff now? Is it possible to take the property tax bills that have ownership, et cetera, and add that into the database, since we're going to be mailing invoices anyway, right, once a year?
So what data would you like to add to the database?
So we have ownership information and addresses, correct?
Yes.
From the property taxes. Are those downloaded at this point onto the already?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would also, I'd echo what Susan was saying, and I'm actually go a little more conservative than Vanessa on this. I would make I'm okay making the property registration mandatory, because that's what we need to collect the fee. So if that's not up to date, that could be mandatory. Then when it comes to anything additional, I would like there to be some incentive. And I think, fee pass through, I'd be very supportive of some incentive to drive any additional information to go through to the system. Also, I'd say annually, I wouldn't say, as a move out happens. I think I have 12 units, here's the current rent of, to get this to actually incentivize people, I think you've got 3 fields or something per unit. That's what's the current rent. I'm not sure what other fields you would want, but yeah, current rent and whether it's rented out or not, the bare minimum. And if that gets, I'd be even open to having 2 tiers of fee. If I don't know if that's actually workable within the current CSFRA or not. It's probably not. So that would be an amendment, but I'd be open to creative ideas to to get people a discount based on current state that we have today to fill out that information.
Yeah, I agree. It should be minimal.
All right, moving right along. Any other comments on that one? Okay. The fee. So,
Can I,
sure.
for clarification, and also maybe Justin and Karen, if they would like to put an registration requirements like that in, should that go through a ballot or can that be done through regulations?
I think we might be able to do it with regulation, but I would have to look at that issue. I have to admit that I have not parsed it completely, but there's a potential that you could do it as part of the regulations. It would be stronger if it were in the CSFRA, if that's what you want. So.
And just a comment on that, I mean, I think anything, as city council is thinking about a ballot measure, you wouldn't want any poison pills, right? So anything that we've been saying, I think, at least my comments, would be within the framing of only put in the items that are absolutely necessary and that won't prevent an amendment from getting passed by the people, right? So it doesn't necessarily change the fundamentals of the CSFRA, but it's just amplifying, or making some of the things easier that we want to do. And I think this one, I think the people of Mountain View would probably be amenable to having properties some amount of registration to be a part of having a property in Mountain View. All right. So the next one was not on the list. That was for the annual fee. There are a few ideas that were mentioned regarding the fee and how that might be changed. So we'll just go down the line. Anything I think related to current fee and how any changes you'd like to make to that. Anki, were there any other items that you had on your list regarding the fee specifically that we should think about?
No, I think I just remember the discussion we had maybe 1 or 1.5 years ago, where we were discussing the fees and showing what other jurisdictions were doing. At the time, I believe it was hard to do a pass-through regarding with the current text of the CSFRA.
Yeah, so regarding pass-through or potential split, those would be the topics where I think we're talking about. We'll start. I've lost track of how I've been starting it, so I'm going to start with Vanessa here.
Remember me?
Yeah.
I would recommend that we cap the fee at $100. I remember seeing that somewhere. I don't know if that was the 2020 initiative, but I think that would be a good idea. I'd also like to see kind of a split with the residents. I don't know if it needs to be 50%. It could be a lesser number, but I think a split would be fair.
What do you mean by a split?
Where the residents share in the cost of the
Tenants.
Yes.
Tenants would start paying for it.
Will not start paying for it, but share in the cost. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a 50% number, because I want to make it easy, but it's just once a year, and it could be amortized over 12 months.
You all have more experience with this than I do, but my feeling is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We've gone from almost 150 a year down to 101, so we're meeting the goal of 100. I think it's fine the way it is.
All right, thank you. Emily.
So I disagree in putting a cap. I understand the sentiment, I really do. But we have been doing a pretty decent job in making sure and being mindful of our costs. I don't want to run into the issue where we can't do what we should be doing because we don't have the money for it. And that is my concern with the cap. It's a similar thing to the splitting of the cost. And I remember I had the opportunity early on, when we first got thrown into this wonderful committee, to speak with other jurisdictions. I had the opportunity to speak with, I believe it was the executive director for Oakland. And they have a they split their fees between the tenants and the landlords. And because of that, that was considered a poison pill every single time they tried to raise their fees. They simply could not raise their fees. And as a result of that, a lot of their petitions were backlogged, and I never want us to be in that kind of situation. So if we are looking at splitting it with the tenants, we need to be very mindful of, do we want an initiative that is going to pass or not? And when it regards to caps, do we want a program that works, that is thought through fully with the needs of the program, the needs of our city, and the needs of both the housing providers and the tenants? Or do we want to be constrained by an arbitrary cap? So I am one against a cap, and I am against the changing of the way we do our fees, at least for now. That could get revisited in later years. I don't know quite when, but I think that is a poison pill to this initiative.
All right. Jillian.
So just a point of clarification for council. Do we right now have the authority to enact a regulation that would allow for a pass-through of the rental housing fee to tenants?
No.
Okay. So this would be a ballot initiative?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that, I don't think we necessarily need to talk about a huge amount then, given that it's not going to be our decision. But I think that, this is a program that's designed to benefit tenants primarily. And I think that there should be some kind of shared cost sharing. What that allocation should be, I don't know. But I think it would not only be more equitable, but it actually would encourage greater participation and involvement in the program by tenants. Because I think when you get a bill and you see that you're being charged for something, you want to know what you're getting for that service, and you want to know what this is all about. And if you're not paying for something, you don't oftentimes pay as much attention to it. So I think, and especially given the fact that I think a lot of, Measure V is calculated to favor tenants almost in its entirety, I think this is kind of a minimal thing that would help to alleviate some of the concerns of landlords.
Sure, Emily.
Another thing in terms of a cap is the question if we do need more money, where is that money going to come from? And council has already had stated their fears of us taking money from them. So I think by instituting a cap, we will be terrifying council even more. In terms of the Measure B was designed to benefit a stabilized community. So in terms of that spirit, I don't view weakening it as necessarily a benefit to our community. And that's why I want us to be very cognizant of what can pass and what cannot.
All right.
Can I just add one more, maybe
Sure.
It's a question as much as anything, but so in theory, there could be a ballot initiative that simply gives the RHC discretion to set or determine whether and to what extent the rental housing fee is passed along to tenants without the city council making the full decision itself. Is that fair?
I mean, it could be, or it could be very specific as to a percentage. So, you know, and if you have recommendations as to which you would prefer.
So I guess just me alone, I would say that my recommendation for council would be to give us the discretion to decide whether and to what extent we want to pass through the fee to tenants, and then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
I would agree, that would be fair.
Me too.
All right. So sure.
So I have a sort of unrelated question. So we have AB 1482 out there. If that gets passed on a state level, what does that do with the CSFRA, or does that?
It doesn't override the CSFRA. AB 1482 would basically impose a limit on rent increases in any rental unit in the state. I think right now it's at 7% a year plus CPI. So it wouldn't impact the CSFRA because your annual rent increases are right now no less than 3, no more than 5. We would have to look at it as how it would impact individual rent increases, but I looked at it a long time ago. I don't think it does.
I wonder if City Council would look at that as a guideline. Maybe we should ask them, the subcommittee.
Sure, Emily.
Like Vanessa, I've been following AB 142. I do believe that it's an over view, so it's not considered a rent control law, but an anti-gouging law, and that's why the percentage is absurdly high. So I don't mind City Council to look into it. I don't think that is in the scope of this amendment. In the long run, it would be nice to do a study in the future of how certain state initiatives do affect us, should they affect us, especially since the state legislature changes their bills so quickly. But I do not think that that's within the scope of this section.
But they're asking us for recommendations, so I would make that recommendation if they're not looking at it already.
All right. So my feedback, sorry, was that all the feedback you guys had on this issue? My feedback specifically on the fee, I do feel pretty strongly about the option for landlords to pass through 50% of the fee. Because during this process of fair return, we heard from a lot of owners of small buildings where, the fee, or big buildings, where the fee was actually cutting into that guaranteed CPI that they were, that the CSFRA was allowing them. Also, we have a lot of legal fees, and in some of the legal arbitration that we get into is, against one party or the other, right? It'll be, something that's not in favor of tenants or something that is not in favor of landlords that we're advocating for, that our legal staff are paying our legal staff to advocate for. And that just seems, to me, like if it were split, it just seems a little more fair on both sides, that everyone's paying into one pot, that, whatever legal fees or legal issues come up, it's not one group totally paying the entire fee to litigate against themselves, essentially. That's just my sense of fairness. And I'd also say the Measure V, in its language, it's very balanced. On page 1, it's about guaranteeing or ensuring a fair return and preventing unfair rent increases. And I think a split fee to me, because of my experience with other jurisdictions who do this and allow for this, it does feel more that everybody's in it together. And it also would net out to about $50 per year for renters. So it doesn't seem unreasonable to ask them to pitch in my view. And to be honest, a lot of landlords won't ask for the pass-through. I mean, I think it's just an option for it. The way it would be set up would be as an option for them to pass it through if they wanted to. With the AGA, I mean, again, I'd ask for the mechanics. I think the subcommittee could look to other jurisdictions who do this already. And maybe they already have research on how often it's passed through. But it's my sense that a lot of landlords probably don't. But for the ones that care deeply and who feel like they're not getting their CPI, I feel like it'd be good to give them that option. But again, my personal feeling.
My concern is that we're setting how much the rent increase can be each year, and this would be in addition to that. So rents are stabilized, and people know what the level will be year to year in increases. But you wouldn't know when you're going to get a pass-through fee unless we made it an automatic annual fee. And as a tenant, I would be very concerned. So I would be opposed to that.
Okay, that's good. Good feedback, and that's a good point. That I was not in favor of a cap. I think we all are actually trying and doing a good job of bringing it down every year by looking at our costs with a trained eye and trying to reduce them and run as efficiently as we can. That's not to say, though, that something could happen where there's an overwhelming number of, I think originally, Anki, we were looking at maybe there could be 100 or 200 petitions per year, and then our fee, we wouldn't be able to keep it down. So, when I say 50, it could be about $50 per year at the rate that we're going now. It would be, could be even less than that, but something could also go wrong and take it the other way. So I wasn't supportive of a cap, just to clarify that. All right. We had two more topics. Sorry, was there any more feedback on those? We had two more topics on our list. I think we can get through it if everybody is amenable. Maybe we'll start with short-term rentals. Again, I don't think we haven't really covered a lot of this, the actual details of it, which are going to mean a lot. But I think if everyone could just kind of say if they would like this to be something that's regulated or not, and then anything that you know specifically about as far as details, that'd be helpful. And then we can hopefully get through the last two topics and be done. So, Susan.
I don't want to regulate it. I think it's a huge can of worms.
I agree.
And just to clarify, thank you for the expediency. We're going to get through these topics quickly. You would not like to clarify the CSFRA to.
I would not include short-term rentals in the CSFRA.
Would you like to clarify the CSFRA so that it specifically doesn't apply to them?
It doesn't apply to them now.
I think there's ambiguity. No. Oh.
I do not think the CSFRA should regulate short-term rentals. Rentals less than 30 days.
And would you be supportive of the amendment, including text that would say the
No.
CSFRA does not cover this? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Great. Susan, also.
I agree.
Okay. All right. You agree with that? Okay. All right. Emily.
I hate to drag this out a little bit more if I'm probably the only one that's dragging this out. Is this a problem that has to be fixed through the ballot initiative, or is this something that we could fix ourselves? Well, the thing is, if it's a ballot initiative, you are still throwing it to the voters where they may or may not pass. That's the whole thing about a ballot initiative. If it could get fixed with us, then cool. But that's a question that we should be asking. How does this look like if the RHC, if a ballot initiative, whether or not it has it, fails? How are we dealing with it?
But I guess, do you, in your opinion, do you want this? Would you be okay with the CSFRA kind of just making a clarification or having them clarify it to say, even if it was to say, this isn't in the realm of being covered by the CSFRA? Because I'm just trying to get more background on where you'd like to net out.
I'm trying to minimize how much changes we are doing to the CSFRA. So I want to make sure that we are in a scope. If I don't, this is one of the things where I kind of don't have a set opinion on. it's not that I don't care, it's just I don't have an opinion on what is the best thing. I understand that clarification is needed. Is clarification through a charter amendment needed, is the question that I'm asking. Or is this something that, should it fail, or should it not be added in the charter amendment, is there an alternative for council to look at?
I think there's an alternative. We would want to look at it carefully. It gets to how things are defined. And I think as the staff report pointed out, there's a very specific exemption for certain types of units that are rented for less than 30 days, but it's not an exemption for all units that might be rented for less than 30 days. So we would want to look at how much maneuvering room there is within that. So that was a wishy-washy answer, and I know, but we need to look at it a little bit
Is it
more.
a two-pronged discussion, though? Is it short-term rentals for an owner/landlord on the one side, and then on the other side, is it short-term rentals for a resident?
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I
this is
would-
why
yeah,
I think
I
there was
would-
consideration from this end of the dais of, like, this is way more complicated than.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would.
It is complicated.
Well, I think the lease agreements pretty much regulate what people can do, I guess, as a tenant, and that's up to the landlord and the tenant. So, yeah, I'd like to stay away from this.
Julian?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it's an area that we shouldn't be interjecting ourselves into. I think there's a lot of complexity that goes beyond just rent stabilization. I think, it goes into the kind of the character of a neighborhood, and there's noise issues, and there's all these other kind of secondary issues that go along with short-term rentals. And I think, frankly, that city council is probably better equipped to understand that entire dynamic. And I think we kind of look at it probably end up looking at it in a rather narrow way, when I think there's a lot more that's implicated, and it really affects the whole city if you're going to allow this or not. So whether it's clarified by way of a ballot initiative or not, I think that's, I don't have a strong opinion about it, but I think for the time being, unless someone is saying that this is a real pressing issue that has to be resolved, I think we should be content to kind of take a step back. And if it doesn't work out at the ballot level, perhaps we can revisit this.
All right. To save time, I'm pretty much a +1 on what what Julian just said. Yeah, if that's good enough for you, Tim. All right. We'll move on to the last topic. And Emily, if you want to expand upon this topic, but the idea of allowing for edits to be made to the CSFRA without a ballot measure.
I only bring this up because I know that was brought up with the subcommittee. And I would love to see what kind of input we have. We get, within the CSFRA, it is our job in terms of the clarifying legislation. And we have pushed our clarifying legislation ability to a really interesting spot, thanks to the brilliance of our staff. So I know that council is looking at how to change this, how they can change it without going to the ballot every 2 years. I would love for our staff to let them know what is in our purview that we're able to change, so that they know that a lot of things aren't actually set in the law. There is a lot that's set in law, and there's a lot of things that we can't change, but there is still a lot of wiggle room where the RHC has been able to adjust as needed and clarify as needed. And I think that's an important thing for council to know.
All right, thank you. On the topic that Emily just described, let's start with Julian. Do you have an opinion or any comments?
So we're talking about whether a supermajority of the city council could amend the CSFRA without a ballot measure? Is that?
Was that the specific mechanics, or were you open to more ideas than that?
It wasn't a it was in response to what the subcommittee had talked about. I was limiting our conversation to what we have already done, because sitting through Susan and I, we both were sitting through the subcommittee meeting, and sitting through there was a lot of feeling of council doesn't really know what we do. To some degree. So I think it is important for that better communication in terms of when they look at changes to the CSFRA, they need to, that we're clear on what they are allowed to change, at least through us. That's what input I was hoping that the RHC could give to council.
Okay, I'm just going to defer. I think that makes sense, but I don't have anything to add to that.
I will defer as well.
Me too.
All right. So I will have a few comments. I mean, I think this could jeopardize, my feedback to the subcommittee would be that if there were some sort of way to set it up so that you, in a ballot, to set it up so that in the future you could change the CSFRA, or someone would have power to change it without going back to the people. I guess my interest would just be that you wouldn't be able to overturn the crux or the main parts of the CSFRA. I mean, what it was intended to do, it seems like if that's going to change, then the people should change that. I do think there's a lot of things around the edges that do need to be cleaned up, that could need clarification. And we do some of that, but then we're also hamstrung by the language. So it would be interesting if they could put something into the text that makes it easier for them to make changes around the edges. But also, I think, then that may be a poison pill for that ballot measure, because then some people would say, well, the city council is setting it up so that they can make any change they want to the CSFRA in the future. So I just don't know if it's tenable. So I guess my recommendation would be, that they may not want to put that in there. All right. We made it through all the items. I guess, did anyone have any final comments you felt like weren't your comments that weren't captured in the topics that we talked about? Otherwise, you can either say it here, or all of the public is welcome to email or talk directly to the subcommittee. And it sounds like they're going to have another stakeholder meeting to collect that feedback as well. Is that right? So Emily.
When is the date of the stakeholder meeting?
So the stakeholder meeting is scheduled for August 19th, yes. Okay. Next Monday, 7 p.m., council chambers. And then, again, although this is a stakeholder meeting, all the meetings, the public is more than welcome to comment. All the meetings are open. All 5 scheduled subcommittee members are open to the public for comment. So although this one's focused for stakeholders specifically, there's always other opportunities just to let the public know.
Sure, Emily.
Question, so if we're going back to the 7.1 timeline, that's a lot of meetings. Could we get some updates after those meetings happen in our committee, essentially?
Absolutely. Just an oral update, verbal update, or did you want like a staff report, or how to convey that communication?
It's hard to say because we don't even know what the subcommittees are doing really yet. Like, I'm kind of unsure why we have this many meetings, or the subcommittee has that many meetings. But at least so that we could be looped in how they're going and what are the changes. If there's anything that we should know before we throw our hands being like, subcommittee, don't do that.
But won't there be minutes of those meetings published?
Yes, there are. Yes, there are. And I'd be happy to. When's your next meeting? September 16th?
I would love a staff report if you're offering.
Maybe put something together real
That
quick.
would be wonderful,
To
yeah.
help summarize.
Yeah, just the,
some
you
of
know,
the
just the-
deliberations. But I'd be, if you like, put it on the agenda and report back to you that way also. Whatever the committee's pleasure would be.
Would everyone find that useful?
Yes.
All right. Sorry for the additional work there, Tim, but it sounds like we'd like to hear back.
That's fine.
All right. Thank you. All right. Any other comments? All right. Sounds good. So with that, we will adjourn at 10:12. So thank you everyone for your feedback, and we'll see you at the next meeting on September 16th. All right. Thank you.